My name is Jessica and I am 28 years old. I live in California, a place where the roads never sleep, the shops stay crowded late into the night, and the city hums with noise long after the sun goes down. But my life itself is quiet. At least, that's what I always believed. I work as a kindergarten teacher in a small, cheerful school not far from my apartment. My days are filled with the sound of little voices calling Miss Jessica 100 times. They remind me that love, honesty, and joy don't have to be complicated. After school, I walk home through crowded streets. I stop at the corner grocery store, pick up a few vegetables, and head back to my apartment. Most evenings, Brian is already waiting for me. He sits at the kitchen table with that calm smile that always makes me feel safe. Brian and I have been together for 10 years. 2 months ago, he proposed in the middle of a simple dinner, and I said yes without a second thought. He had been my safe place for so long. Of course, I said yes. Brian is thoughtful. He notices small things like how I can't drink coffee without a splash of milk, or how I always double check that the door is locked before bed. He buys me flowers for no reason. He listens to me talk about the children's silly questions, even when I know he's tired. To anyone looking in, we are the perfect couple. People often tell me I am lucky, and for a long time I agreed. But there has always been one thing, one shadow I could never shake. Brian works at night. When we first started dating, I didn't think much of it. He would leave around 10:30 at night and return before morning. I assumed it was just his job, something I didn't need to worry about. Whenever I asked, he kissed me on the forehead and said, "Don't worry, Jess, I'll be home soon." At first, I let it go. Love, I thought, was about trust, and Brian gave me no other reason to doubt him. But as the years passed, I realized how strange it was. Not once did he tell me where he worked or what exactly he did. He never mentioned a company name, never described his role, never gave me even a single detail. 10 years together, and I knew nothing about his nights. Sometimes I would sit on the bed watching him get dressed, tying his shoes, adjusting his collar. The question would burn inside me, but the words always froze in my throat, because when he smiled at me, I wanted to believe there was nothing to fear. Still, doubt grew quietly in my mind. Maybe my worry came from my own past. My father often disappeared without a word, gone for days at a time. My mother would pretend not to notice, pretending everything was fine. As a child, I hated the silence between them. I hated not knowing where he was or why she refused to ask. I told myself that one day, when I grew up, I would never accept that kind of secrecy. I would never be the woman left in the dark. But somehow, here I was, engaged to a man who walked out every night, leaving me with questions that I buried instead of asking. It wasn't until after Brian proposed that the unease became too heavy to ignore. One Thursday night, I sat at the kitchen table, grading children's drawings. But across from me, Brian's chair was empty again. I stared at it, my pen still in my hand, and a thought hit me harder than ever before. How can I marry a man when I don't even know what he does at night? How can I promise my life to him when there is this part of him that remains a mystery? That was the moment I decided I could not stay in the dark anymore. I needed to know. The next evening, Brian left the apartment like always. He smiled and said, "Don't wait up." I nodded, forcing myself to act normal, but inside my heart pounded. 10 minutes after he left, I grabbed my car keys. My hands were shaking as I stepped into the night. The air was cool, but sweat ran down my back. I found his car a few streets ahead and followed, careful to stay far enough behind, my headlights dim. My eyes locked on his tail lights. At first, it seemed normal. He drove toward the busier part of the city. My chest loosened. Maybe he really did just have a night job. Maybe this whole thing was in my head. But then he turned. Finally, he pulled into a lot beside a plain gray building. I parked further down the street. Brian stepped out of his car, but instead of his usual jacket, he was wearing a dark suit I had never seen before. Sharp, professional, almost intimidating. 2 men in black suits with earpieces stood at the entrance. Guards. They nodded at Brian, letting him pass. My heart pounded in my ears. This was no ordinary job. I couldn't stay in the car. I needed to see. Moving slowly, I pressed myself against the shadows of the building. Finally, I found a small window and looked inside. What I saw made my knees weak. Brian stood at a large table surrounded by men. Maps, photos, and computer screens covered the surface. He spoke with authority, pointing at the documents while the others listened carefully. On the wall behind him were crime scene pictures, lists of names, papers filled with codes. I shook my head. My mind screamed that it wasn't real. And then my eyes landed on something that froze me completely. A photograph, my photograph, pinned to the board. My stomach dropped. My breath stopped. Why was my picture there? Why would Brian, the man I trusted, the man I loved, put me on that wall? The answer hit me like ice. Brian wasn't working a normal job. He wasn't hiding because of embarrassment. He was hiding because his entire life was a secret. He was an FBI agent, and somehow, in ways I didn't understand, I was part of his mission.